Thank you for the opportunity of being here today. The title of our talk is Not Library Catalog Does Not Follow FRBR. And here are some reasons or some evidence why that's the case. And we wanted to choose a kind of polemic title for the talk because we know that some of our colleagues from the library wouldn't agree with our statement in the title. I don't think I have to convince this audience that the bibliodata is important kind of data for literary studies, contains information about works, authors, editors, languages. And I have been working at the Library of Göttingen since 2 years ago. And there I have the privilege of working with the catalog. I mean, the catalog is because we can edit, and this is the part of our catalog. Library is part of this common catalog. It's called K10+, and this is the common catalog from 2 library networks in Germany. It contains 70 million records from all kinds of publications, right? From primary literature, secondary literature, for all subjects with many kinds of publication types, journal, ebooks, manuscripts, musical scores, and in dozens of languages. And this heterogeneity is something very important where we will see some of the challenges that we face. And when you enter the library, you learned also about this FRBR model, where there are different kind of levels: work, expression, manifestation, and exemplars. And actually, only the lowest one it represents a physical object in the real world. The rest the rest are abstract representations. And because they are abstract representations, we need authority files to declare these entities and to work with them, right? So with authority files, we declare these entities, we identify them, and we then can use these identifiers across catalogs. And these authority files, this identification, we can use for this task. We can use several resources or knowledge bases, such as Wikidata or VF. But for the German libraries, the authority file, when it comes to linking entities in the catalog, is called GND, Gemeinsame Normdatei. So when we want to normalize entities in a catalog, we need to use the GND. So to what degree does the catalog follow the FRBR model? So as a user, you do find, for example, in the catalog, when you are looking for a title for a publication, you find some evidences about FRBR. For example, you can work by the title of the work, not by the title of the publication, but the title of the work. However, when we look at the FRBR terms and then we contrast them with the main concepts that are used to structure our database, you see that they don't really match. Or more specifically, basically, the concepts that the catalog follows are just, they would be between the manifestation and an item level from the FRBR. So here we have the example of Pride and Prejudice with 3 different expressions, the original English one and 2 different German translations. These expressions have been instantiated through different manifestations published by different publishers. And then, only then, we would have what the German libraries would call title. So normally for the different publication years, you would have a different title. And then if the library has at least 1 exemplar, they would instantiate this title at the local property level here. And depending how many exemplars you have, then you would instantiate them at the exemplar level. So as you see, the library catalog the entities, the structure of the catalog mainly represents the reality between manifestation and items, and all the upper levels of the FRBR model, we would need to work with linking to the authority files. So, because of this problem that many of the information for the FRBR model that we would expect already in the catalog isn't there, we have proposed a project, and it is called Linking Literary Works in Bibliodata, or LiVOP. And when I say we, I mean the library in Göttingen and also the head office of one of the library networks in Germany. And our goal is to identify and reconstruct for literary works the different levels of the FRBR model that are missing from the current state of data. And for that, we would generate suggestions using machine learning and rule-based approaches for all this missing data. And we have we proposed this project last year, and we haven't heard still whether it's going to be granted or not. We were really hoping that we would already have a response for this workshop. Sadly, this is not the case. So we are going to present, sadly, we can't present what we are currently doing because we haven't started, but we have the question, what do we actually, how much information is missing from the catalog or from the authority files towards FRBR? And for that, in my presentation, I'm going to go through these 4 levels: author, work, expression, and manifestation. And at each of these levels, I'm going to ask, is it possible to instantiate this in the GND? So is it, if yes, can we already state that the GND have a good coverage of this kind of entities? And about the catalog, does the catalog contain explicit information about this level? And if not, has the catalog implicit information to reconstruct this kind of information, right? So these are the different levels, and these are the questions I'm gonna propose. So let's start with author. Can we instantiate people, authors, in the GND? Well, the answer is, of course, yes, we can. If we go to GND Explorer, we would find that there is almost 6 million people in the GND, so pretty rather large number. However, whether this is a good coverage or not is still open. So for this question, for the good coverage or not, we have used an external resource that is important for the literary studies, the European Literary Text Collection. This is a series of corpus with 100 novels for each, for 11 corpora in different languages, and it has been collected in the past years. So then from all these texts, we have looked whether the authors of these texts appear in the GND and also in VF or Wikidata. And these are the results. So as you see, so we would have 1,100 different authors, 1,100 authors, sorry. And VF and Wikidata have more than 1,000 of these authors, and GND would have more than 900. So there is still a difference, but actually it is rather good, the coverage in the GND. When we look at each language, you see that the green bar is the GND, and the second group second group of bars, they represent German. And if we compare it to the other languages, we would see that there are more German authors in the GND, but actually many of the other languages, for example, English or French, are also very good covered by the GND. And if we when we go to the catalog and we ask whether this information is explicitly in the catalog, we find different ways of giving the information to the author in different fields. But so a link to a GND, to an author GND, we would find in around 31% of the records, and as an free text file, would find it in 65% of the records. So, in summary, it is possible to instantiate authors in the GND. There is a good coverage in general, and there is a lot of explicit information. However, not all the cases. There is still a majority that they are not a link to, they are not normalized. So let's move to the next level, work. Is it possible to instantiate works at the GND? The answer is again, yes. And has the GND a good coverage for works? Well, here we find slightly higher than 500,000 works. So in this case, we find a much lower number than authors than we have seen before. So this is why we still have to answer, well, does 500,000 works, is it enough to really work with this kind of information? So again, we take the LTEC as a comparison resource, and here we see a very large difference between the GND, BF, and Wikidata. So BF and Wikidata have more than 700 works of this corpus, and the GND only contains 200 of these different works. Not only that, if we look again at the languages, we would see that German has 80% of novels of this corpus. We find the works in the GND, and for the rest of the languages, they vary between 10 and 40%. So here, in comparison to the authors, where we find rather good coverage for many languages, for works, there is a pretty clear bias towards German authors. We change the question now. Do we find explicit information about works in the catalog? For that, we look again to the specific field in the catalog, and we find that only 3% of the records have a link to the work. So that is pretty low. However, actually, because of the heterogeneity of what I mentioned before of the catalog, we don't really know how, we still don't know how big our subset is in the catalog. So even probably already a coverage, if around 60 or 70% of the records would have already a link, that would be probably, for our purposes, would be probably the great majority of their cases. So this is one of the problems that we still have for the project. But in any case, 3% really represent a very low number. If we look closer to the documentation of the catalog, we find this comment that is especially recommended to link to the GND works of classical music, religious works, and legal works. So, and this is again where we observe, you remember the 500,000 works that I mentioned before? Well, actually, half of them are works from music. And probably the other half are religious works and legal works. So for literary studies, apparently, even this 3% is basically for these three kind of works. So there is little information about the works for literary studies in the catalog. It is possible to instantiate works in the GND, and the coverage apparently is not good enough. We go a level deeper. We go to the expression. Can we instantiate expressions in the GND? Tricky question. We have asked several people, and basically the response that we have gotten is no, you can't. However, if we look at a resource like Lobit, where you can explore the GND, we do find a few thousand cases. So, that's kind of library work, right? You find things that shouldn't be there, but actually they are there. And probably it makes sense. It makes sense for a specific library or for a specific time. But this is what we have found. In the catalog, you can't make a link to the GND expression entity because there are no GND expressions. However, you can make relations between different titles. And we find only for 0.03% of the records we find this information. Incredibly low. So what do we need to recreate this information about expressions? Well, we would say that we would need the language of the publication, the original language, and the names of the translators. Do we find this information in the catalog to make the suggestion? Well, we do find for the majority, well, for 78% of the records, we find the language. And as I said, as I mentioned before, probably 78%, it covers probably 100 of the publications that we're interested. Original language, we find it only for 1%. Of course, we don't know how many translations are in the catalog. So is it really that we have only 1% of the catalog is translated, or is it missing data? We don't know. And about the names of the translator, that's tricky because actually normally you find the information about secondary authors, and secondary authors can be editors, for example, or translators or printers and so on. So this kind of information we have for 12% of the records, but as I say, probably there are many false positive if we are looking for translators because probably there are much more editors. So here we have many problems. You can instantiate it in GND, therefore there is no good coverage in the GND. There is almost no explicit information, and even the implicit information, apparently the only information that we can really rely on is the language. The other two appears to be rather low. The lowest level that we are looking today is manifestation. Can you instantiate manifestation at the GND? Again, the answer is no. Yeah, I have an example here that is a little bit more complicated, but I'm going to skip it because I don't have too much time. Do we find explicit information in the catalog about manifestation? Yes and no again. There is a field about relationships between manifestations, and we find 7%. For 7% of the records, we find information here. However, if we look closer, we will find that it's actually normally the information that an ebook was also printed or a print version was also published as ebook. So this is also not the kind of information we would really be looking when you try to recreate the FRBR model. So again, yes and no, but rather no, the information is missing. Do we find the implicit information to recreate, to make suggestions about this level? In this case, the situation is better. So for 61% of the records, we have the information about the publisher, and for 98% of the records, we have the year of publication. So in summary, we have a problem at the GND level in the manifestations, also in the explicit information in the catalog. However, at least we find other information, implicit information at this level. So summary of our talk. We have used this metaphor of the three colors, and if we summarize this, using the colors as ordinal values, you could summarize the four levels, saying that at the author level, we have the situation is rather good. The It's not perfect, but it is much better than the other two. At work and manifestation expressions, we find important challenges, and especially challenging is the expression level, right? And this is also, expression level is where the multilinguality, where FRBR actually represents the multilinguality of the publications. And this is where we find the strongest problems. So next steps, well, actually the entire project is a next step, starting with hopefully, the grant approved. And in general, on the one side, we know the steps that we need to apply in our projects, are working quantitatively with the catalog, the publication of the data, even for the head of the network. It is also a challenge for them to even, give us all this data in a reliably way. Application of different type of algorithms, and especially the multilingual challenge that we face at the expression level. But we are also aware that there is another kind of work that we have to do with this project, and it's communication with libraries, and communication also with the G&D community. So for example, we have to convince the libraries that we need to be able to normalize our data in the catalog, also with other resources such as VIAF and Wikidata. And with again the community, we need to convince them that we need a better coverage for works, and that we need to instantiate expressions and manifestations also as entities in the G&D. So here are some references, and thank you for the attention, and I'm happy to answer any possible question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, José. Questions? So, Fanny, please.
I'm an FRBR novice, so just wanted to know the mapping that you do for expression with translations. Is that like a normal thing for FRBR? Because you have translations that are specific to publications sometimes. How would you represent that? Not to editions, but to publications, I mean, yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm understanding. I don't think I'm.
Some translations are made on specific publications, so there may be changes in the wording of the original translation.
Yeah.
If you do it at the expression level, then how do you link the translation to the specific publication?
So I don't know. I'm not sure if I understand correctly. So you say that there are different works.
There are works.
Yeah.
You have the manifestations. The expressions.
Yeah.
Which you associate with editions and translations. From what I understand.
So the data model is already starting. Discussion is already starting. Yeah. The first question is we are going into is FRBR enough, and that it shouldn't be the case anymore.
Right.
Yeah. So you have the editions and the translations. And then you have the publications, but there are cases, specific cases, where the translation is linked to a specific publication. So to me, that expression is a bit narrow. I don't know.
So, but in the FRBR model, the different translations are represented as expressions.
Yeah.
And then from the different.
But you might have a French translation of an English publication from the 1990, for instance, which differs from the 1992 publication.
It's depending on how the model works. How your model works, I suppose.
Yeah, there can be multiple expressions.
Yeah, exactly.
And different level of works. You love in FRBR strictly, but nowadays.
However, in any case, we have seen also that there are many problematic cases where FRBR model, when you try to fit it to the FRBR model, it doesn't really work. We want to start what could work. We would, one of the reasons we believe that FRBR model on the one side is not complex enough. On the other side, the libraries haven't been able to actually implement it. So we would argue that let's start with what is doable, and let's move these problematic cases for the future once we have solved a rather large number from the simple ones. But yeah, I mean, of course, when you think about poetry, for example, or for many centuries, many of the kind of texts that the literary scholars are interested in, they don't really fit into the FRBR model. So we are aware that the FRBR model is just a simplification of the reality. But even this simplification is not implemented in the catalog, so we have a rather pragmatic point of view. Thanks.
And Nanette asked if you mean cases where there is no link between expression and manifestation, or when the translation does not refer to the concrete work. I'm just reading the question.
I'm not sure whether the question is for me.
I think that we are starting to get lost every time we are.
Yeah.
So maybe I will try or suggest to skip discussion about the coherence of FRBR model. And I have seen Nico.
Yeah. Well, thank you. So I was wondering, would this everything related to FRBR be a point where we would want to push towards the fact that we want to probably use the full text too when we are doing whatever we do? So for example, and then it's very much a question that what are we able to do anyway? And for example, well, we've been thinking lately very much about 18th century Britain and thinking about the metadata in the SPC and then the full text in ECHO. And then with the idea that we can look at overlaps of texts. So if you look at like 30% overlap between texts, and you can give them like a cluster ID, which is again making more metadata, and then you add it to, which is good. I mean, that this is how it works. And then you can start using that and then thinking that what does these clusters of overlap mean? But at least I'm able to say that when Hume publishes political discourses and it ends up in the essays and treatises, so there's a shift and I can follow it. So and then you can do it at scale. And then you iterate probably further from there, depending what you are interested in.
Yeah.
But I mean, that if we don't have that metadata and we're working with only the catalog data, we'll never get anywhere. I mean, basically. So I mean that if we really take seriously the FRBR type of questions, we really need to push for the full texts for the reason of creating metadata or bibliodata. Let's put it like that. Here, but but I mean that I think that like now in this, that's one of the agendas that we have. But for this particular question, I think that we really need to have a united front and push for it and say, hey, we don't have this, then the kind of questions that the humanities people want to ask, they can't be answered.
I mean, if in a world where we are not tied by the resources, I would say yes. But we have to face that we have the digitizations of a very low percent of the library records. So definitely, this is one of the ways that we should move on. And there is a very interesting project working exactly on that in the United States. And they have had a presentation in the last DH conference where they have shown some very interesting results. But as I mentioned, especially for example for publication from the 20th century, we don't have digitizations of these texts. So there are two different, we can work in from different approaches, and every step that we move forward, then we can apply it to the other fronts. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Because we are running slightly out of time, I suggest the last question. Yeah.
Do you actually work with a class library reference model rather than FRBR? Because about 4 or 5 years ago, it actually managed to combine several models, including FRBR, into one. So should there be some discrepancies or so, then this model should be the right one. So
yeah. Yeah, so as I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, some of my colleagues wouldn't agree with our title. They would say, no, that's not true. I mean, all the fields are related to the FRBR at some point of the FRBR, and as you mentioned, actually there have been new models and so on. So the actual model that we work on at the library catalog, it is fully documented. If you want, I can send the presentation with the links, and there is a full documentation of all the fields and subfields and so on. And there are linked or commented in comparison to different models. But as I mentioned, even though the different fields are mapped to different models, when you actually presume that this is actually true, and then you start questions about the percentages, this is what you get. You know, for literary scholars working, you know, if the catalog would have the information that you would expect from FRBR, it would be much better than working with what we actually have right now. So that's the reason why we propose the RED project.
thank you.
Okay. Thank you, José. Thank you very much for your talk once again.